Right, everybody, welcome to August 2020 Consciousness Hour. Sadly, we had some terrible news last month when my producer, Radia Nunez, sadly died very, very suddenly and completely unexpectedly. She was 47 years of age. I literally spoke to her no more than about 3 weeks ago, where she was fine. And suddenly she went into a rapid decline. Even now, I am not sure of the cause of death, but many of you may have seen Dia's sad last message on her Facebook page when she said how ill she was feeling. I have been working with Dia now for around about 10 years, and all I can say is I'm going to miss her terribly. We've been having problems today trying to get the software to work, but it does seem to be working, and I'm certainly hoping that we're going out live at the moment, and I've got my fingers crossed that that will be the case. But life goes forward, as life always does, and I've been looking forward to this interview for a long, long time. This is somebody I've known for quite a few years now, Dr. David Parry, the Reverend Dr. David Parry, who over the years has become a very good friend of mine. I consider David to be one of my real intellectual friends. He's one of these guys that really knows so much about so many things. It's absolutely extraordinary. And his recent book on Mount Athos is absolutely extraordinary. And you can probably see from my posting on it just how in admiration I am of David writing this wonderful work. Now, without further ado, David, hello, how are you today?
My dear friend, it's such a pleasure and honour to be speaking to you on a Sunday afternoon. I am fine. I'm not a techie person. You got us through the qualls and the storms of the run up to the live broadcast. No, I'm very happy, my friend. Very, very good to see you. I tend to identify simply as a pastor. What was that? Was it the Mayor of Casterbridge, Thomas Hardy? I'm just a humble preacher man. So you've been very kind, but I tend to come from that sort of self-perspective, I suppose. Although I will say one thing: when you said initially come on to the consciousness hour, I confess it triggered a sort of semi-conscious memory from years ago. Before I lived in London, I used to come up to London every now and again and go to Speaker's Corner to see what the vibe was, what was going down there. And I remembered a confrontation between a Marxist who was speaking at Speaker's Corner and an irate member of his audience. And the Marxist turning on him and saying, "I am very conscious," to which the man replied, "Well, that's a good start." So it's I hope I'm very conscious, and it's very, very wonderful, a great honour to be on your Consciousness Hour.
Okay, so for me, in many ways, you've been quite an interesting guy, but somebody I don't know a great deal about your background. So if you take this little opportunity just to tell the listeners a little bit about who David William Parry is and your background and everything, then we'll get into the more meaty stuff.
Gosh, the family's sort of a mixture. I'm not entirely English. I know there's lots of that going around at the minute, but I'm sort of a horrible admixture of Celts, a bit of German, a bit of Italian. I'm told, if you go back far enough, they all come from Ireland. That all of my family at one point in the far past all came from Ireland. I don't know about that. There's Welsh in the family. There's certainly English in the family. I grew up in Fareham in Hampshire, which was a wonderful place to grow up. Very leafy, rivers flowing, swans making nests and raising their cygnets every summer at the end of my grandmother's garden, castles, ruined abbeys. I mean, it was lovely. I moved to London in the early 80s because, like everybody else, if you want to make a go of it as a young whippersnapper, you have to come to London or be associated with London. I don't think that's changed yet, sadly, but there we are. I am an openly LGBTQ plus pastor. I hope I got that right. There are so many letters nowadays, I can't remember them all or what they all stand for. I felt the call to ministry, curiously. I felt the calling, as it were, from my early teens and wasn't sure what to do about it at all. I initially, when I came to London, started worshipping with Metropolitan Community Church, which of course is a church that originated in the States, with a special calling to LGBTQ people, to that community. I was there for a very long time, and it was when HIV first hit the country. I remember going to, this is why I'm so skeptical about what's going on at the moment. I remember going to a funeral every week for a year. That's when you know there's a serious medical crisis. And saying to everybody at the end of that year, I love you all, but I'm sorry, I have to leave. I can't take any more of this. I travelled through Unitarianism to Congregationalism. I flirted with Gnosticism, which of course is one of the running themes in my personal religious and spiritual search. I got involved with Catholicism for a while, independent Catholicism, that is old Catholicism. But I'm coming full circle and in the process of transferring my clergy credentials back to MCC. In fact, we're struggling to reopen an MCC presence in South London. The previous one closed down many years ago. And we're resurrecting what we're calling Valentine's Hall in South London, which we're working very hard at the moment. But of course, all our plans are on hold because all the churches are currently closed, and we have to do likewise until November. So I'm an avid lover of poetry. I am also a dramatist, a bit of an actor. I produce sometimes, though I hate producing. Oh gosh, what else? I haven't explored fantasy yet, but I'm going to. I keep being compared to G.K. Chesterton. I think it's not simply because I tend to be on the big side. At least I hope it's not that. And there was a curious link, a synchronism the other day. Somebody said to me, did you know that he also had a struggle with fantasy writing? He knew it was good and important, but he actually didn't like doing it. And I thought, that's interesting because that resonates with me. I'm playing around with fantasy writing at the minute, but I'm very uncomfortable with it because I'm not sure what status it enjoys in the terms of literature. So I don't know, does that answer your question? I have no idea. Who am I?
Big question. I would suggest that maybe you are Friday. If G.K. Chesterton is somebody and you come after G.K. Chesterton, one assumes that the man who was Thursday and you're the man who was Friday. Right, okay, so one of the things I'm really been interested in, I really loved your recent book on Mount Athos, as you know. And one of the areas you talk about in this, and you do it in your poetry as well, is a term that I find quite intriguing. It's called beautification. Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean in terms of poetry and writing, what you mean by beautification?
Let me begin that with a brief preamble. I think shows like this are absolutely vital and necessary in the sort of time frame we're going through at the minute. I think not only are you a brave researcher on a number of levels, I think enterprises such as this, experimental shows such as this are absolutely vital because most of the previous structures we were used to and grew up with are beginning to fray at the seams, and we've got to admit that and start embracing the future a bit more. I know because I've known you for years now that you prefer a more scientific view. You know, what's going on, what are the mechanics, what are the nuts and bolts of all of this, and you know that's vital because of the sort of society and culture we live in. But I suppose that's a preamble to saying I think we've shared those concerns for a number of years. But I wasn't really as drawn to the scientific analysis of all of that. And I have great admiration for everybody that is. You know, science is a manifestation of the human spirit as much as the arts, as much as cultures. I can't see any type of competition there. But for me, I was never really drawn to that. I was drawn to, okay, what do we do? What do we do about all of these levels of consciousness? How do they impact into our lives, not only on a meta level, but a daily level? What does it mean? And when I first moved to London, the other thing I was doing, apart from running around to poetry societies every single week, was reading Roberto Assagioli, who of course founded the School of Psychosynthesis, who came up with remarkable thoughts. I mean, a friend of Freud, a friend of Jung, who said, you know, basically, and forgive me wherever you are, Roberto, I'm paraphrasing you rapidly, Freud is absolutely correct. There's a basement. But if there's a basement to a house, surely there's an attic. Without an attic, without some sort of higher consciousness, not simply altered states, but a clear variety of higher consciousness, there's no way to explain Mozart writing symphonies when he was a child. There's no way to explain religious genius. There's no way to explain all the intuitive leaps that we make, which he clearly identifies with the arts. So, for me, that curiously, he starts my journey in poetry in many ways. I've written two reasonably well-received collections, The Grammar of Witchcraft and Caliban's Redemption, both of which were attempts, because my passion has always been language, my passion has always been the word, to think, right, what are we doing when we write prose? What are we doing when we write rhyming words? Where is all that aiming? There was an important Freemasonry historian, Manly P. Hall, who talked about beautification, and that interested me. And I was reading something again, mid-80s, where he was saying, what we've got to do is make our environments impressive. And he, of course, associates that with architecture. We've got to make them impressive, stately, like the ancient temples of Egypt, like the Colosseum, all those ancient Greek marbles. That's what we've really got to do. And I found myself thinking, well, if that's true of architecture, surely it's also true of literature. And surely it's clearly true of painting and music, but why not literature too? So beautification can seem like, it can seem like an optional extra or something you do at the end of a process, but I wasn't convinced of that at all, and I'm still not. I think the need to beautify, to elevate, to improve, to raise up our daily states of consciousness, to give them greater forms of integrity, greater forms of complexity, greater forms of intellectual and moral balance, all of which are beautiful things. That is a necessity in our lives. Someone living on a council estate surrounded by ugly environments and ugly psyches from the people around them is not going to prosper in life. Whereas if you say to that person, that is not simply a description of your life. Do you know you're a beautiful person too? And there's something beautiful in you. The kingdom of heaven is within you, and it's within those people too. They may have difficult circumstances, but you're a child of the cosmos. All of a sudden, that person is in a completely different spiritual and psychological territory. So for me, that process, which is not only, dare I say, academic and rarefied as a spiritual pursuit, is also a social and cultural pursuit, which I'm convinced we need to actively pursue. We do. I'm trying to think how I don't launch into a huge, long diatribe or exegesis here. Beauty is often associated with pleasure, even higher order pleasures. Lower order pleasures, something looks nice, some body looks nice, they look attractive, that meal looks tasty. It can be a higher order pleasure, like literary criticism, art criticism. But what I'm talking about wouldn't simply be linked to the delight one feels in the creative process, in the normal human creative process, but something that raises the human condition itself up to a greater understanding of itself. Therefore, for me, I suppose beautification, deliberately and consciously making things beautiful as we can make them, is actually a potential bridge to the transcendent itself. So it's not merely a nice stained glass window in a church. It's actually what that signifies to us internally and how we allow that to unfold in our lives. So beautification for me has become, curiously, the pastor side of me is talking more and more about it these days than I ever did before, particularly because, in our recent pandemic situation, which has not been an easy time for clergy of every description, if you say to people, that's not the entire picture. There are all beautiful things in the world. There are profound things in the world. There are wise things in the world. Please don't forget that, no matter how much on the ropes that you feel. That begins to make little everyday miracles, that's Chesterton, little everyday miracles that raise us up into a greater comprehension of ourselves and the environment, I hope that wasn't too rambly, Anthony.
No,
but it's a Sunday afternoon. Right.
No, firstly, I'm fascinated by the reference to Manly P. Hall. In my book collection here, I have a number of his books, including The Secret of the Ages. Manly P. Hall has always fascinated me. Also, a point that you were making there that I think I would like to pursue a little bit more. There are two things. The first thing, the point of creativity. You know, where creativity comes from, whether it seems to channel down from somewhere else. And like you said, with Mozart's ability to just hear the music in his head and then put it down on paper as if he was some form of medium, of a transcendental something that sits behind this reality. Now, of course, again, you know, as your interest in Gnosticism, we could argue that it's somehow a leakage through from the pleroma into the canoma, into this kind of the reality we live within. But also I'm intrigued by the concept of aesthetic taste and aesthetic beauty. I mean, is there such a thing as objective beauty in that, you know, is aesthetics a cultural thing, or is it something that is objective beyond us? And from this, I'm then reminded of Plato's Forms and the idea of, is there an ideal of beauty in the background? Now, you were mentioning about poetry, and I think there is something wonderful about poetry that I can never quite grasp, and I've always wanted to ask a poet this, as to how, for instance, the romantic poets like Wordsworth and Shelley and various other individuals who I love, and T.S. Eliot, who I absolutely adore, where does this poetry come from? So when you are writing a poem, can you explain the process? Does it channel into you? Where do the rhymes come from? You know, I mean, I know it's $1 billion question, but I'm really intrigued to ask a poet like yourself, what is the genesis of all that?
Gosh, I don't think these things can be generalized. You know, that's an arty thing to say, isn't it? But unfortunately, I think it's true because, you know, it depends on the point of departure in the arts. I think also the other caveat I've got to give there before I go any further is that everyone seems to have me down as an antiquarian, you know, some sort of antique antiquarian. I don't know, present company except because I know you don't, but that's because we know each other. You know, I don't know where that image comes from. You know, I'm not Thomas Aquinas. I didn't live 1,000 years ago. You know, I'm actually quite a modernist, and want to embrace the world that is now. For me, I can only answer from my perspective on poetry. For me, it starts as a concept. I mean, I'm certainly exploring. I think people have me down as a conceptualist if they know my work, which is weird for me, but, you know. For me, it starts with the concept, the notion, the idea of something, which, of course, in itself has numinous qualities. You know, the physical presence of something is never the entirety of what it is. There's always more to any object, animate or inanimate, than its physical being in a particular place. You know, we live in a universe of so many levels and kinds and varieties and qualities. You know, to assume that we've got the whole picture just because, you know, with a person, it's absolutely ridiculous. Just because something is in time and space in front of me or behind me, that's very misleading. Therefore, for me, it almost, channels is the wrong word, it forms itself. The words, the images form themselves around a central concept that I wish to explore at a particular time. I mean, certainly my first two collections were about Shakespeare's character Caliban. He's a short monster, a demonic dwarf in Shakespeare's last play. I think that's the last play he wrote on without anybody else. I'm not saying he wrote everything with everybody, but, you know, in theatre you collaborate. That's just a fact of theatrical life. So I think that's his last full masterpiece without anybody chipping in. And you get this haunted monstrosity who has the best poetry in the entire play through his mouth. It's verbalized through him. And that caught my attention years back. So, you know, if anyone's paying attention to the script, I mean, before the play begins, in their own prehistory in that world, Caliban has tried to rape Miranda. It comes up in the text. And yet he's speaking in the most breathtakingly beautiful poetry. And that sort of confused me about Shakespeare. I mean, what's he getting at there? What's he trying to get at there? Even Prospero, when he's not sure he can entirely keep Caliban under control, the poetry is not as beautiful, and that's incredible. So what I was looking at in the form of that character was not only the rejected part in all of us, the part we reject and that other people reject. And what does that mean if we're looking for something like wholeness or totality in ourselves? I mean, what is the part that we can't bear to look at ourselves? And certainly in those two collections, I let him speak very freely. I mean, he says things that horrify me to death that I never ever agree with in a million years, but I had to give him full rein and full voice. Therefore, the poetry in my case surrounded that magical misfit, born of a witch and trying to find his own redemption in his own way. And that was why it became literally a pursuit for redemption for him as a character, and my use of that character in those conditions. I mean, Gnosticism, I think that ties in with Gnosticism. Caliban in the second collection becomes a pagan saint. Cum luce salutem, with light salvation, which he mouths constantly at the end of the second book. My interest in Gnosticism also begins as a teenager, because I liked the idea that religion wasn't simply about faith, and I think that's a very misunderstood word in all sorts of ways nowadays. You know, it leads to the abuses of the religious tradition. It turns God into a nitpicking Latin master, and we're all in school trying to pass an exam, and he's always trying to find us in fault. Oh, I didn't get that bit right. I have to redo that particular part of the test, and that can't be divine. Or, God was a gym mistress trying to put us through our paces. No, So Gnosticism was basically, for me, some sort of verification. In other words, there was a way to look at religious mysteries and get a response and try and find ways to understand them within oneself, which became as self-evident as a fact of science in the outer world. For me, certainly Gnosticism makes no sense in terms of doctrines, in terms of cosmologies that are well and truly outdated now, as an inner journey into the very core of the soul, which is what I think certainly Gnostics like Valentinus was trying to achieve. Excuse me. And then all of a sudden we're on very familiar territory in an age which is starting to explore psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, counseling. And all of a sudden these things become, these ideas become forms of depth, prayer and meditation. If we take that as a premise, of course, we end up with a view of human life, of the human persona, of the human being, which I know you're very fond of, as a multi-layered creation. We're mind, we're emotion, we're body, we're spirit, we're ether, we're all sorts of things. So where does all this trickle down from? I'm not sure it's a trickling down, more of a trickling through. It's the internal trying to externalize. It's the, what was that book by Alice Bailey, The Externalization of the Hierarchy? That made complete sense to me. Are we going to find them on another world? No, because they're already here, but they're on the inner planes, and that's where we've got to start looking for them. That's where we start finding the answers to gnosis. That's where we start unpacking the riddle of gnosis. And for me, that is very, very strongly expressed in the arts. Curiously, now I'm going to upset loads of people by saying this, curiously in the modern arts. How can one say that a great deal of modern art, particularly in painting, isn't religious art? Okay, they don't like iconography, they don't like the figure, they don't like a simple use of colour, but every time I look at a Mondrian, what I'm looking at is a Platonist, and of course he was a fully paid up member of the Theosophical Society. I'm looking at a Platonist exploring the eternal through colour and shape and form. So for me, this is not only an exciting time to be alive as a man of faith, but it's intriguing as a man pursuing artistic goals, because we're going to stop looking above, I hope, and start looking within Does that make any sense to you, Anthony?
It does indeed, and there was so many, as always when we talk. I'm sort of sitting here and I'm picking out this and I'm going, well, that's an interesting point, I need to pursue that. Then that's an interesting point, and it's always the case whenever we meet, we end up having these fascinating conversations that go into some incredible depths, which always intrigues me. I mean, particularly, I love your angle here on the Tempest and on Caliban, because I've long suspected, and I'm not alone in this, that the relationship between Prospero and Caliban is incredibly Freudian, or even more so Jungian, because you have the idea of the kind of the dark part, the dark side that Caliban is, whereas Prospero is the positive side. And the relationship then with the people who land on the island, which, as I recall, was probably Bermuda, and everything else. So it's a fascinating play. Now, one of the words that you used there, you dropped into the conversation, is conceptual and conceptualism. Now, this is quite an interesting point as to exactly what you mean by this, but also within your own creative world, both as a pastor and in the British theatre and in terms of stagecraft. What do you mean when you use the term conceptualism, and how is that applied in those circumstances?
I've never known what my relationship is with the world's conceptualist arts. I don't particularly like the results of Damien Hirst's outpourings. Having said that, I'm going to backtrack instantly, because I sort of did like the sheep in aspects. I sort of did like that. Because the concept there is, what he's trying to do is capture a moment in time. So we can argue about how successful that was, but certainly I can appreciate the idea behind that creation. I don't particularly resonate with people like Tracy Emin. Yeah, an unmade bed, full of unwritten histories, promises for the future. Yeah, okay. My trouble with conceptualism in the arts, and of course it's a branch of philosophy and metaphysics, which is very, very old, as I know you know, because we brushed on it before. I think it's much more defined there than it is in the arts for a number of reasons. It would have been nigh on impossible until recent times to function in the arts as a conceptualist, because all of that cultural history needed to be in place to arrive at a position whereby the concept can dominate the artistic moment, the moment of production. Therefore, we mustn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think it's incredibly poor of modern times to forget history as a discipline, because unless we have that sort of backdrop, unless we have that immensely sophisticated setting behind us, we actually lose the significance of the direction of where we're going. In terms of conceptualism, I think we've finally come of age in the arts, Western arts, whereby we can allow the concept to shine through and then work out what we do about it. The trouble with conceptualism as it's practiced at the moment, I think it was one of the big critics a couple of years ago, who I'd better not name because I know them, so I better not say names and patronyms, who said, it's not the problem of conceptualism in the arts, it's the problem of the products of most conceptualists that are bringing it into disrepute. They're not allowing the concept to come through in any meaningful way to the general public, let alone, forget the aesthetes who can see what's going on behind it. So how well is it attracting their attention? But how well is the general public genuinely understanding the concept in the way it's presented to them? I thought that was a devastating comment. I still do. And, as someone who's associated with conceptualism, I'm doing my own best to try and think, okay, how do we present an idea, a notion, a concept in its entirety to somebody? And that's actually quite a task. That's an undertaking and a half. In terms of theatre, someone was attacking me a couple of years ago, as you know, because I've moaned to you from time to time as a chum of mine, and there are periodic attacks. I'm not quite sure what spurs them on, but there we are. Someone was moaning at me a couple of years ago, okay, well, are you acting when you perform religious services? And for me, the answer is actually, so what's the relationship, in other words, between acting and religious ceremonial? I mean, that's what they were getting at. And for me, the answer is actually very, very simple. The concept is different. the concept, the intention, the type of audience, and where you're going with something that looks similar superficially and externally. But the minute you get to the internal dynamics of it all, couldn't be more separate. I know one day I'm going to write about that, but that's far in the future. And certainly in terms of conceptualist theatre, I mean, Victor Sobchak, a good friend of mine, I can't remember whether you know him or not, the Russian impresario, I can't remember. Well, I mean, he's written a script based on the Calibanic materials, which I hope we're going to stage, which, a secret being out, I know we're going to stage next year. You're on the VIP guest list because it's under heavy discussion. So my own view, I don't want to talk about Victor's, is that, you know, is a character bringing out a psychology? Is it bringing out a morality? Is it expressing a moment of beauty or a moment of ugliness? And does the interaction of the characters truly have the association of ideas that bond them in a particular way? Certainly the productions I put on to date, I mean, if anyone looks carefully, which nobody seems to be, they've all got a metaphysical basis to them. I mean, we started with, many years ago, the Botanist, Monsieur, and the Sorcerer-Dervish, Mastali, Shah. Now, my apologies to Westerners listening to that. Yes, that is a mouthful, but we had to keep to the original, which was Azari, written by their great dramaturg, Okundov, about a fraudulent dervish. The real spiritual guy of the play is a naive botanist from Paris who can only see books in books and good in all things, as Shakespeare would say. And he's pitted against this fraud of a dervish who's just got to take everybody's cash. And, you know, so we were looking there at the idea of what would a genuine spiritual person be like in different contexts. I next put on Shakespeare in 10 scenes, both serious and tragic. And the idea there, the concept there was, well, what if a real alien turned up and was arrested by the police and had to prove he was an alien? So we managed to turn him into a fairy prince. If you're dealing with alien life, you know, what's the only synonym chain we've got to work with? So fairies. So the concept there was a clash of the everyday with the supernormal. When I put on Citizens of Hell, that was a grim play by the great Azerbaijani writer who was a very good friend of mine. Oh, Dan, what's it? Effendiev, Elchin Effendiev, completely slipped my mind for a minute, who was their deputy prime minister for a while. That was putting me off. I wasn't sure I was meant to say that or not. And that's a grim piece. You know, the Russian nightmare is beginning under Stalin. An elder husband is delayed on his way back to the young wife's New Year's Eve party. And the devil himself turns up to plague them both. So the concept there is the unknown, the fear of encountering strangers in our midst, the horror of situations which we simply can't control. So for me, I think the concept in theatre must dominate theatrical productions in a way it never has previously, and that will revive theatre. You know, I'm not against entertainment. I'm not against The Lion King. I'm not against, you know, pandas on ice, all of it. You know, if we're tired, we need to veg out. We don't want to see, you know, we don't want to see Molière. We don't want to see classical stretching material. My problem is that there must be room for that, and there must be time and space for that. And if we say, okay, there is time and space for that, which in London theatre at the moment there isn't, what does that mean in the 21st century? You know, what aesthetic should that embody in the 21st century? For me, it would be the concept of place and time and person, and how we put that on, how we stage that in a meaningful way in front of modern, multinational, multicultural audiences.
Very intriguing, because you intimated here on something that, again, has long interested me, is your personal fascination with Central Asia, and indeed the whole Turkish and Turkoman ideals, because I mean, you invited me to speak at the Yunus Emre Centre in London a few years ago, which was a wonderful opportunity to speak to, and I've travelled in Turkey myself many years ago. What is it for you about the ex-Soviet Central Asian states like Tajikistan and Azerbaijan and places like that? What is it that draws you to it? Because obviously, as somebody that is British by background, it's obviously a very interesting link. It's a very interesting culture, and I have to say there are places there that I've always wanted to visit. Samarkand has just got this. I've got this big thing about traveling the Silk Road and seeing these places. Yeah. What is it that draws you? What is it that was so special for you for these places?
Well, I mean, you're still on the list for people to get over there. I mean, they have their problems too, and I spread your name like wildfire in the right ears. But they have ups and downs economically too, and so you are on the list of honoured visitors, but not quite yet. Not quite yet. 1 second, Anthony. All right, sorry about that. Neighbours. I've been caught twice now in this interview. I loved the beatniks when I was a teenager, but I was never drawn by American culture. It always seemed to lack a certain type of spiritual depth for me. I've had that again since early teenage, mid-teenage. I spent 2 years as a teenager. I'm going to make a confession, Father. Only reading Russian novels and not going out much. And it was the best 2 years I spent as a teenager.
Dostoevsky syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, what do Russian novels give you? They give you the world. My advice to angst-ridden teenagers nowadays, read some Russian novels, because other people have been through it too, and they might have some answers. You never know. So I had the bug in me from that time onwards. I noticed every now and again there were references to these magical places in Central Asia. There was hardly any Central Asian material over here at that particular time. There was hardly any Azerbaijani material, which of course is the Caucasus a bit more, but certainly not Central Asia. And every now and again references would flower, they burst in flames out of the texts. And I'd be introduced to writers like Aitmatov, who I nearly actually met in London. And it was, I was in the same room with him, but the embassy people, I was a young whippersnapper then. So I'm not allowed to meet him. All I can do was nod. So I nodded at him. He nodded back. So these great luminaries of what I think is an intensely religious and spiritual type of literature started flaring up in my consciousness, in my environment. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I want to make more of an inroad. I want to explore those places. I can't. How did it happen? I was teaching some EFL many, many years ago, and had the privilege of meeting some students who then said, have you heard of this person? Have you heard of that person? Yes, I have, which gave them the heart attack. The level of near coronaries I used to give when I answered in the affirmative. Yes, I actually have heard of those people, and yes, I've read them. So I started becoming an embassy brat because they'd invite me to embassy dues. And that was how we started putting on Azerbaijani material, which very, very quickly transmuted into this sort of wonderful, magical series of countries, this territory known as Central Asia. I have walked along the roads where Aladdin would have played as a child. Magical carpets and minarets left, right, and centre. I remember the first time I went to Kazakhstan. We crossed the border in the air, and the air stewardess shrugged her shoulders and looked depressed. And I said in my broken pidgin schoolboy Russian, what on earth is wrong? And she said, we've still got another bloody 6 hours before we get from the border to the city. So, these are vast countries. They're vast and they're genuinely magical. For me in particular, for one reason, curiously, there's a Gnostic connection here. The Manichaeis, when they were slaughtered in the West, started moving across Central Asia, eventually to get to China. In North China, the prophet Mani, the teacher of metaphysical light, is actually known as the Buddha of light. They've had whole libraries shredded as they crossed Central Asia. What you don't know, Anthony, what total bastards they were. All they did was build hospitals, schools and libraries wherever they went. The bounders, how could they? But of course, for various political reasons, because the world hasn't changed that much, all of it was destroyed through the centuries. So there was that aspect for me that actually, you know, there was a magical stream coming from our part of the world and going in that direction. And secondly, the fact that I rejected Manichaeism, curiously, as a form of Gnosticism. I suspect if we had Valentinus in front of us now, or he was just about to join us in this conversation, and we said to him, "Are you a Gnostic?" which of course isn't a word he'd have resonated with and wasn't a word in common coinage at that time, he'd have said, "No, I'm a Catholic. I'm a Catholic priest." So, you know, and it was, and if one reads particularly and you have to read between the lines with Valentinus, you know, if one looks at what's left of his work, and we've got to remember most of it was destroyed for political reasons, you actually end up with some form of monism. You end up with a clear, identifiably similar theology to what's being discussed by St. Paul in particular. He would have said the origin was St. Paul to it all. And yet you're looking at something very clearly on our turf, on our territory. But that didn't travel in that direction, that stayed here. It alerted me to the fact that Turkic cultures don't give in to the Manichaean division between body and spirit, good, bad, right, wrong. Turkic cultures tend to see that as rather naive. We're a series of continua within the continuum. And I might be all mind when I'm studying or reading poetry, and I might be all body when I'm with my partner or when I'm having a good meal, but I'm also all spirit when I'm at prayer and when I'm at meditation. And I'm all joy when I'm walking through the mountains of Central Asia and looking at the beautiful blue tiles that surround me on their cities. So for me, there were two forms of Gnostic impulse, which intrigued me with those countries, as well as the philosophies. There's a great deal of philosophy that has never reached the West, the literature, not simply the poetry. They've had a stream of world-class writers that are still barely known here. You know, it's unwise to think they all just sit in yurts and shove camels in each other's direction all day. You know, they're complex, sophisticated cultures with genuine magic. And actually, I think they can offer lessons to us all in how we treat the environment and how we learn how to cooperate with the environment. I mean, at the risk of extending this answer too long, and shut me up, Anthony. I've known you long enough to shut me up if you want me to.
It's fascinating.
You know, I mean,
keep going.
Well, what annoyed me, and I love Russians, I love Russia, but you know, I love Central Asians maybe a tiny bit more. And what annoyed the Central Asians was the fact that sort of, particularly in Kazakhstan, which is where I've got very many good friends, is that, you know, so they'd be turning up with one hand saying, "Comrade, you know, good to meet you," and with the other holding unannounced nuclear testing in somebody else's country because they're not real Soviets. You know, so there was tragedy in those cultures, there's life in those cultures, there's modernity, there's ancient magic, and for me they just embody the type of synthesis that we just simply don't have in the West. You know, if I go to a university campus nowadays, it's, you know, everybody's got their head on. You remember Wurzel Gummidge, you know, he could put different heads on. They've all got their heads on and they're all listening. But how do you feel about what you're listening to? Does it make you angry? Does it make you want to change the world? Do you feel defeated if you're in a history class by the bloodbath human history has been? Do you feel inspired every time you read Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi? You know, just to be a simple thing is what the Gnostic legacy simply has left us within the West, sadly. But they offered not only the promise of a real Gnostic tradition, because who knows what the Manichaeans actually thought. Most of their libraries were destroyed. And the promise of some sort of organic totality behind it all. The promise that spirit met matter in a non-violent form, and in fact they complemented each other. So that's roughly why I got enchanted and intrigued with those cultures. and I remain very passionate about them to this day. I'm hoping to do a lot more work with them in the future.
Again, so many interesting points there. I've long been fascinated by Maney, and there was a whole chapter on Maney in my first book that never made it through because I was restricted in space. And his whole concept of Al-Twam, his twin, and how the relationship between him and his twin. And I'd never thought about it before as to how potentially divisive the dualism of the idea of understanding theophany and the idea of how you can have an evil God in the presence of evil. And I'd never thought about it before. And I think you made a wonderful point there about Southeast Asian cultures have a continuum rather than this dividing line between everything, really, because of course it's always light and dark and everything, which I presume comes as Maney was Iranian, therefore it must have come from Zoroastrianism and the idea of the light and dark and Azul Mazda and everything else as well. So it's intriguing how these cultures seem to be an overlap between the Islamic tradition later, together with the Confucian tradition, and also the shamanic tradition coming down from the Russian steppes. So you have this, it's almost like the mixture of musics you have in the middle of America, in terms of the creation of rock and roll. And they seem to be at the points. Now, I'm also reminded in your wonderful discussion there about one of my favorite books of all time, The Road to Oksana by Robert Byron, and the way he discusses his travels in that wonderful part of the world. And that was what stimulated me. And I remember once being in eastern Turkey, looking out over the Oxus River, when you bordered, I think it was the border there with Armenia, I guess, right in the far, when it was part of the Soviet Union, and feeling this kind of vastness. There's this vast place beyond that goes on forever. And I think your wonderful description of this, I was enthralled by that. I could have listened to that for hours, and it definitely is a place I'd want to go. I'd now like to return a little bit back to your points on G.K. Chesterton before, and the way in which you were saying, the way in which certain critics had likened you to G.K. Chesterton. And one of the areas that has long interested me in terms of that is the philosophy and notions of personalism. And again, in the writings of everything of G.K. Chesterton. So can you explain a little bit about what you mean by personalism and how that links to Chesterton as a writer and the links with you?
Yes, I mean, Chesterton's really a misunderstood treasure, and a much more open internationalist than people have him down being. The trouble, I've only got one trouble with the modern generation. They think they invented everything. At the minute they realise they're inheritors to everything, then I think we'll all get on much better. I think they're a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful generation of young people, but they've got to remember it didn't start with them. There are precedents. Chesterton, gosh, I suppose people are beginning to liken me with him because, of course, apart from being a prodigious writer of books, what was it, 80 books, 200 short stories, endless poems, that basically he was an art critic, a literary critic, and someone interested in humour, the dynamics of humour. I mean, people used to call him the Prince of Irony. One of the jokes that comes to mind, because of course he was a portly fellow, as I said earlier, and I'm trying to lose weight. I'm just not good at it. I'm trying to become vegetarian again. The last time I was vegetarian, I was bigger than the Michelin Man. I'm sorry, it's lovely, creamy food. I don't know what people expect. I'm flesh and blood, so I'm trying to go in that direction again. But he was a prodigious fellow who was a very close friend of George Bernard Shaw, who of course was a rather thin fellow. And one of my favourite exchanges was when he looked at GBS and said, "If people look at you, they'll think a famine has hit England." To which GBS replied, "And if they look at you, they'll know who's caused it." So please, modern generation, remember that there were living people in those days too. But I think it's the fact that humour is a part of human life, that, we're not just heads on legs, we're not just brains on legs, we're very complex human beings. And the dynamics, the psychology of humour is something that interested Chesterton a great deal, particularly, of course, in his plays, where one of the plays I love and hate most is his play called Magic, where there is an actual paranormal moment. I mean, he was rather prickly about what is a real paranormal moment and what is not, and I know that's something that interests you a great deal. I think you two would have got on great guns on that, because he's never denying there are genuine paranormal moments. He's saying, look, let's separate what they are, because they're so significant about human life, from things that are near misses, because we will benefit if we manage to do that. That's a very early time frame for someone to be talking in that manner. So for me, I suppose it's because I've an interest in not only the theories, but the critique of modern art, modern literature, but also the dynamics of irony on a stage. Somebody said to me after Citizens of Hell, which was a grim experience for everybody involved, you can always tell what the spirit, the atmosphere of a play is by the way the actors are treating each other, backstage, and how things feel at the end of a production, at the end of a run. And we were all exhausted. We'd all had enough of this play because it was just so unrelentingly grim by the time we got to the end. So somebody said to me, closing night, don't you take anything seriously? And I thought, my God, where did that come from? And of course, it's because I've been saying, I mean, we did inject some humour into the play. I mean, that the devil gets murdered twice. The character, how one can't see humour in that, I don't know. So I decided to give him a sort of Irish, because it was during troubles had just flared up in Ireland. The actor was Irish, by the way. It was his suggestion, not mine. Why can't we use an Irish accent for the KGB guy that turns up at the end? And I thought that was brilliant. And that was what caused this assault on me. Can't you take anything seriously? Everything isn't irony, And what I wanted to say was, have you ever read Kierkegaard? Because I think you'd really benefit from that. But no, I think those are the resonances there, Anthony. Yeah, we need people to explore, to examine the dynamics of wit, the dynamics of irony, the dynamics of the pretty as well as the beautiful, the dynamics of play. What makes Chesterton unique for me, and I suppose that's why I never fight back about those comparisons, is because he was very, very interested in what the dynamics and gears of human play, running around a stage, jumping up and down, making a fool of yourself at a party, what they were and what they meant, because he thought that was a key to understanding much deeper parts of the human psyche than we've access to at the moment. And I tend to agree with that. It's that ghost of a tragedy that's haunting me again. If somebody had asked him, what do you think, Professor? We don't know. And he'd say nearly everything. We've done a great job on rationality. I'm paraphrasing. But what about the other parts of human nature? We're just starting out. So that's a convoluted answer. But I think that's the link there.
Okay. One of the terms that I've heard you use recently, which is something I have an idea what you mean by, but I'm really intrigued to know a little bit more about, is Abrahamism. Now, I'm not going to give my opinions to what I think you mean by that, but I'm very intrigued to know what you mean by that, because you give me the impression that it's quite controversial in its approach. So please let me know what this is, and see if I'm right, or see if I'm really off kilter with it.
Can't you imagine someone as astute and learned as yourself being off kilter? It is a controversial subject. It started for me during my travels in Central Asia. People forget you don't just end up a pass. You've actually got to work hard at it. And for me, being openly LGBTQ, you have to find your position. And I thought my original position had gone simply because of the level of tragedy and tears that I encountered at that time. So I'm drifting back to it, but that's taking time. And I'm joyfully drifting back to it. But, at that time I remember thinking, because sometimes there were Jewish people that would come and worship with us, and they felt very at home. And I remember, the germ of an idea starting then. Well, I mean, how different is Christianity to Judaism? I don't mean on the level of doctrines, but doctrines are hammered out at councils, and maybe they're not always hammered out correctly because there are political pressures, there are economic pressures, there are cultural pressures. It depends what time frame you're in. Doctrines don't fall out the sky. They're manufactured by human beings because they're a view, sometimes collective, sometimes a school, of what a particular sacerdotal, what a particular sacred happening may have meant in human terms. So it started then, and then it really developed during my travels in Central Asia. I noticed, let's explode the myth that Muslims are just out to get us. I mean, apart from the fact I'm going out with a Muslim, I've been treated with nothing but courtesy in that part of the world. And the minute they know I'm a pastor, they're even worse. Have you got something to rest your feet on? Right? Will you lead us in prayer this evening? It gets worse and worse and worse. Because they're intrigued and they're honoured that they've got a mullah amongst them, albeit of an unusual persuasion. So I'd always be invited to say Bismillah with them at the end of meals. I'd be taken to see extra shrines or secret places which other Western visitors weren't meant to see. I've actually met the cousin of the stone that's enshrined in the Kaaba. In Azerbaijan, he has a cousin. And they said to me, Westerners, don't come and see this. We want you to meet the cousin of the stone at the Kaaba. So, of course, I went and paid my respects to the cousin of the stone. I think we both got on relatively well. Because, it was, and old ladies, sheer old ladies. So the minute they knew I was a pastor, I had to go over and light candles with them. Then we were all on our knees. Then I'd be explaining, look, I'm getting knee problems. I've spent most of my life on my knees. So then they'd be running around getting cushions. So what is it actually that divides us apart from maybe doctrinal, technical, competing civilizational views as opposed to the small things that seem to unite us, a common worldview? I'll give you an example. A dear friend of mine is Sultan Rev, who's Kyrgyzstan. He lives in Kyrgyzstan. He's a very prominent politician and diplomat. He's a very great writer. And the last time I was out there, I was having supper with him, and he said, look, what's the difference between our part of the world, by which he meant the West, in other words, people influenced by Abrahamic notions, and China? And this is his view, not mine, if you tell a Chinese soldier to go and shoot someone through the head, they'll do it the end. If you tell a Kyrgyz or a Kazakh warrior soldier to go and do it, they'll still do it, but they know it's wrong. They know it's wrong because of the Abrahamic tradition. And then I started thinking, oh, hang on, there's something going on here. There's something that most of us are missing here. So I started developing a rather quirky, at the moment, personal view that I'm beginning to think there's only one revealed religion in the world. And I'm having difficulty with the notion of revealed religion anyway. You know me, that doesn't sit easily with me. But, at one time it was Judaism, it became Christianity, and then it transformed into Islam. And maybe the other practices are just as noble in some ways. Let's look at Buddha. Surely Buddhism's a philosophy. And look how high a human being can fly to the very heavens themselves. But, so that's a philosophy. Maybe Hinduism's cultural spirituality. Maybe, we're looking at those things as opposed to an outpouring from inner spheres. So it's just an idea I'm toying with at the minute. But Abrahamism, as I understand it at the moment, which gets me into lots of trouble, is that there's one religion which started with the prophet Abraham, and really we're all sons and daughters of one single stream of thoughts, concepts, and practices which unite us far more than separate us, and which need to be explored with prayer, with meditation, with discussion. So that's why I'm on half a dozen hit lists at the minute And that's roughly what I mean. Oh, does that horrify you, Anthony?
It does, because, effectively, isn't it the overall concept of the people of the book?
Yeah.
In the Islamic tradition? And, you can see that effectively all three religions go back to the Old Testament, and it is only the divinity, the supposed divinity of Christ that causes the issues, and the concept of the Trinity and everything else as well, which are the major issues there. And I've always felt that you can actually see the developments of the three religions in many, many ways. And I think that the similarities have to be drawn rather than the differences, because for the future of the world, these things have to be the case. Right, okay, so we're getting towards the end, and the timing has worked very well. We've only got a couple more minutes. So in terms of, what are your plans for 2021 then? What are you going to be doing in the next 18 months or so?
Oh gosh, what's that phrase going around London at the minute? Let's have fun in 21. Let's have fun in 21. So I'm hoping to put on a conference for the Nephilim. I'm trying to inveigle you into it. I'm not sure I'm doing too well at the minute, but we're putting on the conference Nephilim and Bloodlines, or Nephilim and the New Anthropology.
Oh, yes.
Because a dear mutual friend of ours, the author Vladimir Wiedemann, was actually one of the few recipients of classes in the New Anthropology when they were in Moscow, and they never made it to the West. A completely revisionist view of what humans are and where they come from. So I thought that was interesting. I think the biblical idea of the Nephilim are interesting, though I personally don't take it literally, but I know some people do. That was a conference originally meant to be put on many years ago, but its time has come now. I should have my new book out next year. I don't want to say much about that at the moment until my wonderful publishers are a little more settled. Hopefully, as I say, the dramatized rendition of my 2 books of poetry on Caliban will be staged by Victor Sobchak. We've got TEDx, of course. Now you're part of our TEDx community. Our dear, wonderful impresario, Daniele Irandust, is putting on a TEDx this year. You're getting involved, and I think with a view towards speaking next year.
Yes.
And also, I'm putting on one of my own plays very, very late next year, possibly at Christmas next year, an extension, an all-trans extension of the Christmas story. I didn't say an adaptation of the Christmas story. I wouldn't interfere with scripture. I'm a minister, but I think you can have lots of fun with various ideas that are in the apocryphal and surrounding literature that will make it a truly wonderful Christmas bash. So we've got five projects that are brewing, all of which will be realized in 2021.
Wonderful. And as a final point, how can people find out more about your work, your website, and various other places and your locations you have on out there in the new sphere, as Teilhard de Chardin would call it?
Man. I've a website, davidwparry.com. I actually do my own pages on Facebook. It's not somebody I'm paying, which is why things go horribly wrong from time to time. Contact me there, contact me on LinkedIn, but hopefully through the website, because it's nice to get to meet people that way and chew the cud and explore some ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David. That was really fascinating. Really enjoyed it. There's so many streams of thought that are playing in my head now in terms of things for next time we meet that I really want to pursue with you. So thank you very much. And thanks for being such a wonderful guest. And let's hope that the technology in the background worked. And I hope that everybody out there in Facebook land listened to this and had the opportunity to do, because I haven't been able to check, because I can't, because sadly my wonderful producer is no longer with me to be able to do that for me. But effectively, thank you very much for listening in, and for everybody, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday evening, or your Sunday daytime if you're based in the States or in Canada, and in fact what's left of your day if you're actually further east to us. Okay, David, thank you very much for this. It's been a wonderful chat, and I will hopefully speak to you soon. Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.